Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Teacher, and today we're reading The Bounty, Part 2. So, last time we left off, we had Captain Bligh and his loyal crew members were set off in a boat after Christian and the other disloyal crew members had taken over the Bounty ship at Tahiti. So, let's see what happened next. After Captain Bligh and the 18 members of his crew who remained loyal to him were set adrift in an open boat, they understood clearly that the chance of their surviving to report the calamity was slim. Nevertheless, Bligh wasted no time in raising the sail and ordering the men to start rowing. He also began a journal in which he meticulously recorded everything that happened. So, if you are set adrift in the middle of the ocean with just a few weapons and a little bit of food and water, likely you probably won't survive. It's very difficult to stay alive in the open ocean with such few things, right? The ocean can be very dangerous at times. But because Captain Bligh was there, he started to tell the men what to do, and he kept a careful record in his journal of what happened, which is why we can tell so clearly now what had happened during that time. The greatest hazard they faced was weather. In stormy seas, the overcrowded 23-foot boat was tossed so mercilessly that drowning seemed imminent. One storm, which lasted 2 weeks, kept the men thoroughly soaked the entire time. On other days, the sweltering heat of the tropical sun left them too exhausted to row. They stayed alive by collecting rainwater and by stopping at tiny uninhabited islands to gather fruit and oysters. In this way, they added to the meager supply of food and water they had been given when they were set adrift. So the weather was the most dangerous thing, right? All the waves would toss this boat around, that people could have fallen overboard or the boat could have even turned over. So that was the most dangerous. And sometimes they would be wet all the time from the rain, right? That can make you really, really cold. And then other times the sun was so hot that they were so tired they couldn't even move the boat. So lots of dangerous things. But they luckily were able to stop at little islands to gather some food, and they collected rainwater to continue living. At last, weak and barely alive, they reached Timor, north of Australia, where they were received by the Dutch governor of the island. Their ordeal had lasted 41 days. Another 10 weeks elapsed before Captain Bligh was well enough to leave for England. When he arrived there in March 1790, he was lionized by the public for his amazing feat of crossing almost 4,000 miles of uncharted ocean in an open boat. Nevertheless, losing one's ship as a result of a mutiny was a serious matter that required investigation. Bligh defended his actions well before the court of inquiry, which was conducted by the Navy. They ruled that he was not responsible for the loss of his ship. So finally, they made it to a place just north of Australia, right? So after 41 days on open water, very dangerous open water, they finally made it to land. And they were so sick that they needed 10 more weeks before Bligh was able to go back to England. But when he got there, everyone thought he was amazing because crossing that much ocean in such a small boat seemed impossible to people. It was a really amazing thing that he had done. But he lost his ship, and as the captain, they had to figure out what happened. So he went in front of a court and said what happened, and thankfully, the court decided that he was not responsible. The British government took a quite different view of the mutineers, however. Having learned that some of the former crew members of the Bounty were on Tahiti, they sent an armed ship, the Pandora, to bring them to justice. When the ship arrived in March 1791, the officers found that many of the mutineers had married Tahitian women and were beginning to assimilate into the life of the island. All the men were quickly apprehended and taken aboard the Pandora, where they were interrogated by the captain. They told him that Fletcher Christian, with 8 crew members, had sailed away to an unknown destination after a brief stay on Tahiti. So the British government decided to go after those who had taken over the bounty ship. And they went to Tahiti and found many of the crew members had assimilated or gotten used to life there. They could tell because they were married to Tahitian women there and were just living life regularly with them. So they took them onto Pandora and interrogated them about what happened. And they gave them the name Fletcher Christian, right? Him and 8 of the crew members stayed just on Tahiti for a little while before they left. Those are the real bad guys, right? So what happened? With the captured mutineers on board, the Pandora set sail for England. On the return voyage, however, 4 of the prisoners drowned when the ship sank in a storm. They had been kept shackled below decks, with the captain refusing to release them until the last moment before the ship went down. Of those remaining, 6 were arraigned, and when they eventually reached England. At the trial that followed, 3 were found guilty and hanged for conspiring to take over the bounty by force. The others were set free. So out of all the prisoners that they took back from Tahiti that had taken over the bounty ship, right, they had some of them had drowned, right, because they were in chains under the boat and it was too late. Once the boat started sinking, they had already drowned. Um, Others were found guilty and hanged or killed, right, for taking over the bounty by force. And then the other ones they decided were innocent and they set them free. And yet the story does not end there. In 1808, an American seal hunting ship called the Topaz dropped anchor off of what was believed to be an uninhabited island, 1,300 miles southeast of Tahiti. A party sent ashore to explore discovered a man there named Alexander Smith. He had been one of the mutineers on the Bounty, and he had a bizarre tale to tell the American sailors. 20 years before, he said, Fletcher Christian had sailed to this speck of land, known today as Pitcairn Island, accompanied by 8 of his fellow mutineers and 18 Tahitians. After the Bounty had burned and sunk, the men and women began their new life on the island. But dissensions soon developed when the sailors tried to force the Tahitians to become their servants. Quarrels led to violence and eventually to murder. The society they had established collapsed into anarchy. Within 10 years of the Bounty's arrival at the island, Alexander Smith was the only one of the men left alive. Today, his descendants still live on Pitcairn Island. So, this in 1808, this American seal hunting ship went to this uninhabited island, but it happened to be inhabited by Alexander Smith. He was one of those who took over the Bounty and stayed with Fletcher Christian when they had moved to this new island. But the problem was when they did this, they took Tahitians with them, but they tried to make them into their slaves. They tried to force them to be their servants and work for them. But the Tahitians weren't happy with that. So they started to fight and eventually to kill each other until Alexander was the only one of those left alive. And that's quite an interesting story about what happened to the Bounty ship. Thank you for reading with me today. We do have links related to each of our articles. If you want the link for this one here, you can find it down in the description below.